Señoras y señores, muy buenas tardes. En el Salón Rojo de la Facultad de Derecho de la Universidad de Buenos Aires, damos comienzo al acto en el que se hará entrega del diploma que acredita al profesor Philip Pettit como doctor honoris causa de la Universidad de Buenos Aires mediante resolución del Consejo Superior 1164/2019. Preside el acto el señor decano de la Facultad de Derecho de la Universidad de Buenos Aires, doctor Roberto Gargarella. Lo acompañan en el estrado junto a nuestro distinguido homenajeado, la subdirectora del Instituto de Investigación la doctora Luciana Scotti, y el profesor Roberto Gargarella. Seguidamente, el doctor Roberto Gargarella formulará la laudatio académica al profesor Philip Pettit.
Es un honor para mí introducir al profesor, estimado colega Philip Pettit, en ocasión del doctorado honoris causa que se le entrega hoy, y hacerlo en nombre de la Facultad de Derecho de la Universidad de Buenos Aires. Agradezco a las autoridades de la Facultad este privilegio, le agradezco en nombre de ellos al profesor Pettit por haber aceptado este premio honorario. Comienzo esta presentación haciendo una breve referencia a la formación y amplia obra producida por nuestro homenajeado. Nacido en Galway, Irlanda, Philip Pettit cursó sus estudios de grado en la National University de ese país, obtuvo un máster en Arts en Cambridge y en 1970 se graduó como doctor en filosofía en Queen's University en Belfast. Fue profesor en el University College de Dublin entre 1975 y 1977. Desde el 2002 es Salón Rojo University Professor of Human Values de la Universidad de Princeton y en el 2013 fue nombrado Distinguished University Professor de la Universidad Nacional de Australia, en donde desarrollaron buena parte de su vida académica. Además, Pettit fue profesor y investigador visitante en diversas universidades, incluyendo las universidades de Cambridge, Oxford, la London School of Economics, Harvard o Stanford. El profesor Pettit ha dictado algunas de las conferencias académicas más prestigiosas, incluyendo de modo reciente la Standard Lectures on Human Values de la Universidad de California en Berkeley y la London Lectures en la Universidad de Oxford. Destacaría de modo muy especial que ha sido distinguido ya con varios doctorados honoris causa de la National University en Irlanda, de la Universidad de Creta, de la Universidad de Montreal, en Queen's University en Belfast, en la Universidad de Lund y la Universidad de Atenas. Sus temas de investigación van desde la teoría moral, la teoría política, desde la filosofía de la mente a la metafísica, y sus trabajos están en permanente diálogo, como es desempeñan en subrayar, con disciplinas vecinas que incluyen a la psicología, la sociología, la economía o la antropología social. Ha publicado más de 200 artículos en revistas científicas de primer nivel y es autor de otros 24 libros que fueron traducidos a más de 16 idiomas, incluyendo, solo por nombrar unos pocos, On the Idea of Phenomenology, Common Mind, Republicanismo. Muchos de sus libros están traducidos. Una teoría de la libertad, On the People Terms, Just Freedom y The Birth of Ethics. Subrayaría además, de forma muy especial, sus muy frecuentes colaboraciones con otros autores, algo que el propio Pettit se ha encargado de resaltar. En diversas entrevistas, él ha sostenido que valora particularmente tales trabajos en conjunto. Ello significa, en sus palabras, buscar un mínimo común con otra persona y evitar que la discusión filosófica se convierta en un juego de suma cero. En igual sentido, en su libro Common Mind, Pettit defendió una posición individualista, entendida como anticolectivista, y a la vez holista, entendida como antiatomista, que le ha permitido afirmar, entre otras cosas, que el pensamiento de los individuos se constituye en parte de las relaciones sociales a través de recursos comunes y esfuerzos colectivos. Honrando esa convicción, Pettit ha cultivado la práctica de pensar y escribir en conjunto con sus colegas. Solo para mencionar algunos de los muchos ejemplos de sus obras escritas en coautoría, mencionaría el libro que escribía con el amigo Martí sobre el tiempo de Zapatero en España, o los trabajos que publicara con John Brightwell sobre justicia penal, con Wendy Skinner sobre la historia del republicanismo, con Chandra Bukata sobre John Rawls, con Jeffrey Brennan sobre la economía de la estima, o con Christian Lees sobre la agencia de lucros. Alguna vez Pettit definió su proyecto como un programa sartreano. Él se mostró fascinado desde su juventud por la capacidad del filósofo francés Jean-Paul Sartre para dar forma a un sistema metafísico, a una teoría de la mente, a una obra literaria y aún a un programa político a partir de la visión de las personas como sujetos autoconstruidos. El existencialismo de Jean-Paul Sartre, su peculiar visión sobre la libertad, motivaron a Pettit en la idea de ofrecerle también una visión particular de la libertad, capaz de servir como ideal tanto para pensar sobre el ámbito de lo personal como sobre el ámbito político. Sartre representó además el gran ejemplo acerca de cómo vincular la reflexión filosófica con las experiencias y actitudes personales. Referencias como la anterior, entre otras razones, interesan porque nos permiten reconocer no solo las influencias tal vez inesperadas que marcaron su modo de hacer filosofía. Para quienes venimos conociendo a Pettit y lo conocemos como un filósofo analítico, resulta sorprendente reconocer la fuerte influencia ejercida por la filosofía francesa en su teoría. Pero además, y sobre todo, uno puede ver así la extraordinaria consistencia que ha mostrado el pensamiento de Pettit de sus inicios hasta hoy. En efecto, Pettit, en parte como Sartre, ha escrito libros sobre los temas más diversos: metafísica, teoría de la mente, teoría política, diseño institucional, pero todos ellos aparecen recorridos por ciertos hilos comunes que le dan continuidad a su obra y que permiten reconocer en la misma a un conjunto de piezas que se van articulando entre sí hasta dar forma en la actualidad a una concepción teórica integral, sólida y coherente. Resulta notable conocer de qué modo la idea alternativa de libertad, que de hace algunas décadas dota de identidad a la teoría de Pettit, estaba presente como objetivo ideal de sus primeras lecturas filosóficas. Luego, y siguiendo la metodología de trabajo que lo distingue, la teoría de libertad como no dominación fue desarrollada por Pettit en paciente y continuo diálogo con muchos autores, en particular a través de sus colaboraciones con el criminólogo Roberto, con quien elaboró una notable teoría de la justicia criminal, y junto con el historiador con quien elaboró, profundizó sus estudios sobre la tradición filosófica republicana. La consistencia y continuidades que se advierten en la sustancia de sus escritos se reconocen también en los métodos empleados por el autor. Me refiero en particular a la persistente pretensión de Pettit de vincular pensamiento filosófico y la propia experiencia. Tal vez el ejemplo más notable, pero de ninguna manera el único, de dicha conexión entre teoría y experiencia personal es el que ofrece Pettit cuando propone el eyeball test, es decir, el test con el que ilustra su lectura de la libertad como no dominación. El test de la mirada, llamémoslo así, nos invita a pensar en las normas propias de un Estado republicano como aquellas que nos permiten mirarnos mutuamente a los ojos sin temor, sin sometimiento basado en el poder superior del otro. Tal como lo confiesa en el prefacio de su libro Republicanismo, él desarrolló la idea de libertad como no dominación, la idea de que nadie debe quedar sujeto a la interferencia arbitraria de ningún otro, como forma de dar cuenta de las peculiares experiencias opresivas que vivió en su paso por instituciones y seminarios religiosos cuando intentaba ser cura. Pettit aprendió allí que la falta de libertad no requería necesariamente de acciones de sujeción violenta por parte de otros, sino que podía deberse simplemente a la imposibilidad de mirar a las autoridades a los ojos, por ejemplo, a partir de una educación práctica en la pasividad y en la inseguridad sobre las propias capacidades. Dicha experiencia le permitió al autor pensar sobre la educación que recibiera en paralelo con la experiencia que describiera Mary Wollstonecraft en 1790 para dar cuenta de la formación de las mujeres como sujetos subordinados. Finalmente, en ambos casos encontramos ejemplos de dominio, de sometimiento sin coerción que podemos reconocer a través del test de la mirada en relación con la mirada del otro. La disposición de Pettit a pensar desde la experiencia nos llama la atención también sobre otra de las virtudes esenciales de su trabajo: su permanente interés por dar fundamento empírico a sus afirmaciones y su preocupación por basar sus propuestas de diseño institucional en una pintura realista del material humano con el que se cuenta. Citando a Immanuel Kant, Pettit ha referido muchas veces a la necesidad de no perder de vista a la hora de hacer filosofía a lo que Kant llamara, se tradujera como the crooked timber of humanity, esto es decir, a la madera torcida de la humanidad con la que, como decía Kant, nunca pudo construirse nada derecho. Para Pettit, muchos de los errores propios de la teoría contemporánea y muchas de las falacias que distinguen a los discursos populistas actuales tienen que ver con el desdén, con la completa ignorancia acerca de las restricciones impuestas por motivos imperfectos, limitaciones propias de la psicología de las personas. Como dice nuestro autor, es un hecho triste propio de la naturaleza humana, que a pesar de que muchos no se hayan corrompido nunca, muy pocos de nuestros conciudadanos sean incorruptibles. Aunque nos pese, no podemos dejar de tomar en cuenta hechos empíricos tales a la hora de hacer teoría social. Dichos supuestos empíricos finalmente dan anclaje a muchas de sus reflexiones sobre la vida política pública contemporánea, que incluyen, por ejemplo, su escepticismo impropio de la tradición republicana acerca de la contribución que puede hacer el Estado en materia de cultivo de la virtud, o sus múltiples reflexiones en torno a la fuerza del poder financiero y la capacidad del mismo para socavar aún las mejores iniciativas y proyectos políticos del presente. El interés que muestra Pettit por la vida política y por la contribución que puede hacerse a la misma de las ciencias sociales resulta una constante en su trayectoria intelectual. Quiero decir, se trata de una educación que se advierte presente en él desde que era un estudiante doctoral de la Universidad de Queen en Belfast y participaba en el movimiento estudiantil hasta su activo y más reciente involucramiento crítico y autocrítico con el gobierno socialista de José Luis Zapatero en España. Tal tipo de intervenciones más directas en la vida pública, ya sea como militante o como analista político, son consistentes con sus estudios sobre el diseño institucional y su permanente interés por lo que John Rawls denominara la estructura básica de la sociedad, digamos, las cuestiones vinculadas con la organización del poder constitucional y con los arreglos económicos sobre los que se asienta la sociedad. En materia económica, Pettit ha venido refinando desde hace décadas la defensa de sistemas de regulación y control público que distingue tanto de los esquemas librados a la mano invisible como de los sistemas basados en la pura interferencia estatal. En materia política, mientras tanto, sus estudios nos refieren a un particular sistema de organización democrática caracterizado por los tres elementos que en su libro de titular reconoce como definitorios de la tradición republicana. El primer elemento ya lo conocemos, el de la libertad como no dominación, que contrasta con la noción de libertad como no interferencia de popularizar la libertad. El segundo elemento, la idea de la constitución mixta, que contrasta con la noción de un único soberano derivado del republicanismo comunitario de expuso. El tercer elemento refiere a la presencia de una ciudadanía activa y contestataria que difiere de visiones más pasivas de la democracia, como las que pudieran propiciar en su momento Joseph Schumpeter o Isaías Berlin en sus escritos. Permítame simplemente, y en este punto, subrayar el especial valor del proyecto de una democracia contestataria, como la que defiende Pettit, en países como el nuestro, en donde la protesta y el desafío permanente contra las autoridades ha sido cuestionado muchas veces desde la doctrina legal y desde los mismos estrados judiciales. Para Pettit, los individuos en general y los grupos vulnerables en particular, minorías étnicas, culturales, sexuales, deben disponer siempre del poder de contestar o desafiar las decisiones políticas que se adoptan. El hecho de que las decisiones políticas se encuentren siempre abiertas al control y al desafío ciudadano resulta para nuestro autor directamente definitorio de la existencia de un Estado republicano. La red de regulaciones, controles y desafíos que imagina y propone Pettit está llamada a favorecer la libertad personal y colectiva frente a los múltiples riesgos que él mismo identifica en textos como Just Freedom. Me refiero al riesgo de la opresión mayoritaria sobre las minorías, el riesgo de la explotación ejercida por parte de los oficiales públicos y sobre todo el riesgo de que el poder estatal sea capturado por grupos de interés dispuestos a favorecer a ricos y poderosos. El objetivo es, en definitiva, establecer protecciones contra el poder privado o dominio y defensa contra el poder público o imperio. A esta altura, son muchas las preguntas que quisiera formular frente a la teoría general construida pacientemente y a lo largo de décadas por Philip Pettit. Si tuviera espacio y tiempo, que no tengo, cuestionaría desde la tradición anglosajona del republicanismo, tradición que asocio con el pensamiento de Thomas Paine, Richard Price o James Burke, su defensa de la constitución mixta y el republicanismo neorromano, para reivindicar una lectura alternativa del republicanismo que subraya el valor del autogobierno. Si tuviera tiempo y espacio, contradiría también, desde un compromiso más comunitarista, su prudencia o temor frente a una política estatal más potente en el cultivo de la virtud cívica. Asimismo, desde una visión más robusta de democracia deliberativa, impugnaría el peso que Pettit le asigna en su teoría penal a la dinámica del escándalo, outrage dynamic, y su su consiguiente defensa de una agencia estilo Banco Central para la definición de las penas. A la vez, desde una concepción dialógica de la democracia, subrayaría el valor de la autoría, o sea, los autores de las normas que luego van a aplicarse sobre nosotros, aún por encima del valor de la contestación o el desafío. Finalmente, objetaría desde una visión socialista, como la sostenida por Terry Cohen, como un amigo, en su ejemplo del campamento, el papel aún limitado que Pettit le asigna a los mercados dentro del conjunto de su concepción económica. Sin embargo, y dadas las limitaciones y exigencias propias de una ocasión como esta, quisiera dedicar las últimas líneas de mi presentación a elogiar a uno de los libros que, en mi opinión, simboliza y resume bien el extraordinario mérito de toda su obra. Quisiera resaltar en tal sentido el valor especial que encuentro en un libro que hemos traducido, no solo su merecido, un gran libro que Pettit coescribiera, como anticipé, con John Brightwell, y que corre el riesgo de terminar opacado por la retilante e influyente presencia de sus estudios más recientes sobre el republicanismo. No solo su merecido, es un libro que de un modo lúcido, humanista y radical desafía toda la doctrina dominante en el área para invitarnos a pensar sobre el crimen no desde una teoría del castigo, sino desde una teoría de la justicia penal. No desde un retributivismo capaz de amparar teóricamente las nuevas políticas de orden y mano dura, sino desde un consecuencialismo que margina en lugar de poner en el centro a las respuestas punitivistas tradicionales. No solo su merecido combina de forma magistral la pulsión política de Pettit, su enfoque filosófico consecuencialista, su filosofía política republicana, el interés por la libertad como no dominación y su persistente preocupación por la madera torcida de la humanidad, de Cooper's Paper of Humanity. Libros como este ofrecen un modo y un modelo ejemplar acerca de cómo encajar y colocar juntas todas las piezas teóricas inseradas trabajosamente a lo largo de toda una vida. Confieso que encuentro este trabajo inspirador y aún emocionante como pocos otros que he leído. Llegados a este punto, solo me queda insistir en las razones que justifican la distinción que hoy entregamos. Por su compromiso político, por la seriedad y profesionalismo con que lleva adelante sus trabajos de investigación más abstractos, por su indeclinable decisión de vincular los estudios académicos con el ámbito de la experiencia, por su voluntad de poner la reflexión filosófica al servicio de la vida en común, por su disposición a utilizar la teoría para pensar mejor sobre la práctica en asuntos de interés público, es que esta facultad ha decidido entregarle a Philip Pettit la máxima distinción honorable. Agradezco entonces, en nombre de la Facultad de Derecho de la Universidad de Buenos Aires, al profesor Philip Pettit por aceptar este premio y por venir aquí a recibirlo. Y felicito también, y de este modo, al amigo a quien desde ahora contamos orgullosamente como miembro activo de nuestra comunidad. Gracias.
A continuación, el señor decano, doctor Roberto hará entrega del título y la medalla que acreditan al profesor Philip Pettit como doctor honoris causa de la Universidad de Buenos Aires. Seguidamente, hará uso de la palabra del profesor Philip Pettit, quien dictará la conferencia titulada Neo-republicanismo, neoliberalismo, neo-populismo.
un gran honor y un gran placer estar aquí en la Universidad de Buenos Aires en esta conferencia magnífica. Y es un honor y un placer aún mayor recibir este doctorado de la Universidad de Buenos Aires. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas. After that, unfortunately, wonderful laudatio, totally over the top, totally exaggerated, and not at all credible, but all the more appreciated for that. Thank you. I'd also like to take this occasion, if I may, to thank our friends who organized this wonderful conference, Francisco, Julio, and the others. Thank you very much indeed. So, I've been invited to say a few words. I'll say some words, I'll keep them as few as possible, but I've probably stupidly opted for a rather grand title to talk about neo-republicanism, neoliberalism, and neo-populism. So I hope that I don't keep you too long, or certainly hope I don't bore you too much. I'll do my best. So, first of all, let me say, I think that there are three main areas of justice that all theories should be concerned on. I'm sure we agree with that. One is the area of social justice, which is the justice that people enjoy socially, vis-a-vis one another within a society, and vis-a-vis, of course, the associations, the private associations and corporations in that society. Secondly, there's political justice, which is the justice we enjoy, if we enjoy it, in relation to the government that actually imposes law on us. We enjoy social justice insofar as we live under a just set of laws that give each of us a decent status in relation to others in the society. We enjoy political justice insofar as the government that actually establishes those laws, enabling us to enjoy social justice, insofar as that government does not impose on us as an alien will or an alien power. And the third area of justice, of course, is global justice, the justice between the peoples of the world and the states of the world. I'm going to talk only, unfortunately, about social justice and political justice. Issues of justice of a domestic, as we say, a national kind, rather than a global or an international kind. What I'm going to do is to try to characterize for you the approach that has certainly inflamed my imagination over the last 20 years, closer, which is the neo-republican tradition as it's come to be known, or the civic republican tradition. And I'm going to contrast it with these two other traditions which are so powerful in the world today, much more powerful, it has to be said, than neo-republicanism. So neo-republicanism is an alternative, as I see it, to those two traditions. So let me first of all explain what I think of as the guiding idea in the neo-republican, or the long republican tradition, which goes back to basically to Republican Rome, and which the ideas from which propagate in the Middle Ages through the republics of northern Italy, through the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries in countries like England, well, Holland, the Dutch Republic, Poland, the Republic of the Nobles, England, the English Republic in the mid-17th century, France, of course, and the United States, the republics of the late 18th century. The ideas are quite continuous, I believe, but there's one core idea, which, like a motif, goes through that long, long tradition. And that is the idea that we describe nowadays as freedom as non-domination. So let me just explain what I think of that idea as being. I think the best way to start in introducing it is to think about the difference between what it is to be controlled by another person and what it is to be constrained by another person. Control I associated with being dominated by the other person. He controls you, she controls you, they control you in the manner of a dominus or a lord. Constraint I think of as just interference. They interfere with you. So here are two ways in which control and constraint, domination and interference differ from one another. I'm going to illustrate them by the first case, which I think is second on the handout. There is a handout which I think most of you received, which I associate with the Ibsen play, A Doll's House. I'm going to illustrate it from that. In the second lesson, I'm going to illustrate by reference to the Homeric story of Ulysses and the Sirens. So the first case is where you have control without constraint. This is to show that control and constraint are different. So think of Nora in A Doll's House. She's married to Torvald, who's a young actor, very wealthy, well, quite wealthy. This is Scandinavia, Norway, in the late 19th century. And it's at a time when the law still gives males huge legal advantages over their wives, for example. And here's the situation of Nora in relation to Torvald. Torvald has all the power legally. So, for example, he can determine what she wears, he can determine who she associates with, he can determine what religion she practices, he can determine whether she goes to the theatre or not. He can determine whether or not she gets any money out of his earnings to spend at her own wish. He's really got an amazing range of power. However, Torvald really dotes on Nora. I mean, he loves her in a passionate way. And in particular, he wants her to have as much freedom of choice as possible. So he lets her dress as she wishes. He lets her associate with whoever she wishes to associate with. He lets her go to the theatre when she wants to go to the theatre. He lets her have carte blanche, as we say in French, for the regular sort of choices that a woman or a man of the period might have regarded as basic personal choices. He lets Nora choose exactly as she wishes. Now, Nora is, in that sense, quite unconstrained. She's not interfered with at all by Torvald. So if you thought, for example, that freedom meant you're not constrained, then you have to say that Nora, of course, is totally free. But he, because of his power, still controls Nora in the following sense. She can act as she wishes, but only because Torvald wishes that she can act as she wishes. So if Torvald changed his mind, if he took against her, if he became hostile or indifferent or fed up with her, if his will changed, then that would mean that she lost that discretion that he had given her. So she enjoys a range of choices, it's true, but only cum permissum, as they said in Latin, with permission, with the permission of Torvald. Torvald might even wish that things were otherwise, that actually he did not have that power over her. But because of the law, and despite what his own wishes are, he does have that power over her. She depends on his will remaining a good will in order for her to enjoy discretion across this range of choice. Now, when the Republican tradition insists that in order to be free, it it's got to be the case that you're not controlled by anybody else in the range of personal choice, then the tradition would say Nora is not free because she is subject to the control of Torvald. Torvald is in the position of dominus, or a master. She suffers what the Romans called dominatio, meaning the relationship between a master and a subject. She is dominated by him. In that sense, she does not have freedom as non-domination. That's a case, I said, of control without constraint. Okay, the first way in which control and constraint can come apart. But there's a second way in which control and constraint, domination and interference, can also come apart. And that's the case where you have constraint, but you do not have control. And if you think of freedom as requiring that you're not controlled, it's going to be okay to be constrained so long as you're not controlled. So what would be an example of that? Well, going far further back in literary sources, so to speak, I take the case of Ulysses and the Sirens from the Homer story. You remember that Ulysses tells his sailors that they should tie him to the mast when the siren voices sound, because he doesn't trust his immediate instincts under the lure, the attraction, the appeal of those siren voices. And they do tie him to the mast, so he's absolutely helpless, right? He's totally constrained, isn't he? He's bound, you know, he's interfered with, if you like, as they sail past the sirens and he battles against his ropes and so on. But is he controlled by the sailors? Well, no, because the sailors are not acting on their arbitrium, as we say, not on their judgment or their will. The sailors are actually acting on terms that he has laid down. You know? The only reason they're constraining him is that they are obeying the terms that he imposed on them as his sailors. So in that sense, he's not controlled by them, though he is constrained by them. He does suffer constraint or interference, but he does not suffer domination. Now, if you think that freedom means the absence of control, the absence of domination, then you're going to say that, just as you said, Nora is unfree, think of that as the Nora lesson, so to speak. You're going to say Ulysses is actually free, though he's constrained, because he's not controlled, he's not dominating. And those are the two really signal features of thinking about freedom as non-domination. The Nora lesson, that you can be unfree without being constrained, and the Ulysses lesson, that you can be constrained without being unfree. Both of these lessons were fully understood already, I would say, by the Roman authors, the Roman Republican authors. But I'm not going to try to detail that in any way. Of course, they were concerned only with the citizens of Rome, but we, the neo-republican circles, so to speak, today, we obviously think of the citizens of any country as totally inclusive of men and women of all ethnicities and so on. Okay, so for the Romans, this approach meant that there were two ways in which you could be unfree. One was to live within a country like Rome and would be a slave. If you were a slave, or indeed if you were a woman under the Roman way of treating women, you were unfree because you were dominated. You were subject to the dominatio of your dominus. Your husband if you were a woman, or your father if you were a woman, or of course your master if you were a slave. So that's one way you can be unfree, the way in which Nora is unfree. If I can just interrupt for a moment, there's a lovely story in a Plautus comedy. Quentin Skinner drew my attention to this particular one, where Tranio, a slave, it's a comedy, remember, comes to the front of the stage before his Roman audience. And he tells them that though he's a slave, he's much freer than any of them, because his master, A, is very gentle very kind, lets him do as he wished, like Torvald. B, he's actually away a lot of the time. And C, he's very gullible, so that he can fool him, so that he can get away with doing anything. By the way, there was one respect in which Nora Torvald, at the beginning of that play, if you remember, did want to constrain, and therefore exercise control over Nora, which was he did not want her to eat macaroons, these sweets. But Nora got away with that by hiding them in her skirts, if you remember the play. So Torvald was also gullible as well as gentle. So Tranio explains to his audience that his master is gentle and gullible and away a lot of the time. So he can do as he wishes. So he is absolutely free. Now, you've got to remember at this point, this is a comedy. The Romans would have found that hilarious. Who could possibly think that Tranio was free? And he's just portraying himself as a clown, that he would imagine that he's free. Because to be free, you had to be not controlled, even by a gentle master. That was the first way for the Romans which you could be unfree by being subject to a dominus in a decent society as they saw Republican Rome. The other way in which you could be unfree, however, was by living in a society like living under an absolute monarch. Even if you were very wealthy and you weren't subject to a private dominus, if you were subject to a public dominus, to a government that was despotic or tyrannical, that laid down laws that ignored entirely your interests or your beliefs, that were just the imposition of another will on you, such a person would also be unfree. Now they thought, of course, that in Rome, the Roman citizen was not unfree in that way either. The Roman citizen who was not dominated privately, they thought was also not dominated publicly. Because although each one of them was subject to constraint, the constraint of the law, just as Ulysses was subject to the constraint of the law, they, the Roman populace, the Roman citizens, were the ones who were in control of the law that was imposed on them. They laid the terms on which government could act in relationship to them. And they believed, Polybius, the Greek historian of Rome, told them how wonderful their constitution was in this respect. They loved him for it, of course. He told them that they were all free as citizens in relation to government because they controlled what government could do to them. You remember roughly in Rome, first of all, there was no one center of power, there were many centers of power, and power was distributed amongst these centers. The people in various gatherings could make the law, actually, and in other gatherings elected who the officials were. And the officials were re-elected every year, and in every office there were at least two officials who could check one another. And there were courts to which you could take officials as having breached the law. And these were popular courts in which citizens were selected, sometimes 200 at a time, to hear a case. So they felt that the law imposed on them was a constraint for sure, but not a controlling constraint, because like Ulysses, it was a constraint imposed at their will. Now that really gives you the two strands of neo-republicanism as a theory of domestic justice. As a theory of social justice, what it suggests is that we have to have a law that enables each of us to enjoy the same range of choice as others can enjoy. These came to be called, in the Republican tradition, the fundamental liberties, the choices that are really crucial in life, and that everyone could have consistently with others having them. The neo-republican tradition argues that, first of all, the law should identify what these choices are. And then secondly, the law should secure people in the enjoyment and exercise of those choices. It should secure people against criminal action, of course, in the criminal law, but it should also secure people against being exposed to pressures from other people that would mean that they are dominated. So, for example, we'd argue that within the area of family law, that there should be protection. Let's take the standard case for women against men. There should be laws of domestic abuse. There should be a possibility of a woman gaining legal support against the abuse of a husband. There should be a possibility of a woman, indeed a man, exiting a relationship if it is abusive. And of course the argument will also be that you need more than law, you need good civic customs, like a tradition, say, of providing homes for battered women, for example. That's part of a social, as it were, counterpart to the law. So the neo-republican is going to argue that you've got to secure, taking that example, you've got to secure people in the enjoyment of their basic liberties, where securing doesn't just mean protecting against crime, but it means securing in a certain relationship as well. Or in employment law, it would argue that workers in an employment situation ought to be secured against employers at least to this extent, that no one can be fired at will. There must be some process. It may not be that difficult a process, but there should be some process in which the employer has to establish that either he or she is unable to continue to employ the person because of, say, economic pressures, or that that person is not doing the job adequately. Some sort of guarantee so that otherwise the worker is going to live at the mercy of the employer, of being just thrown out of work, and is going to be reduced to a dominated, servile position of the kind that precisely Republicans have always, and their Republicans continue to criticize. You need a raft of law for social justice, a raft of criminal law and civil law, contract law, tort law, of employment law, of family law, of corporation law, which means that people enjoy security in the home, in the workplace, in the public space, but also security of a judicial kind. So, for example, legal assistance of a social kind, so that if you are in need and destitute, you're not thrown on the dust heap, so to speak. Security of a medical kind also. A whole range of securities become necessary in order to enjoy freedom. So in this tradition, importantly, freedom depends on law. It is the law that makes you free, combined with suitable social mores. Now, how secure should the law make you? I mean, obviously, law can get to be too securing and become oppressive. Well, there the Republican tradition, and I'm really just drawing on a long tradition of writing around this theme, suggests that you're going to enjoy social justice. You're going to enjoy enough security and therefore enough freedom in relation to others in your society, including the corporations and the associations and the churches and the parties in your society, insofar as you're secured enough so that you can look anyone in the eye without reason for fear or for deference, for kowtowing. If you have enough to support you to that extent, then you are in a society where you enjoy social justice. So notice here what's happening. We're talking about how to make Nora free. You know, except we're taking Nora now out just of the home in all the different areas where she might live. And we're showing that for her to enjoy freedom, she has to have that sort of infrastructure of security, protection, empowerment. Now, of course, it's very difficult to achieve that. It's an ideal, but it's an ideal we have to hold on to, even as we fail to achieve it, just to know where we're aiming at in the making and the changing of law. That's social justice and the neo-republican view. What's the neo-republican view of political justice? Well, here again, the Ulysses lesson tells us that although the law is going to constrain us as it constrained the Romans, if the law is really shaped and formed and applied and enforced on our terms, on terms that we establish as equals within our society, then that law, while it's going to constrain us, is not going to dominate us or control us. It's therefore not going to take away our freedom. And then the question is, of course, institutionally, what are the means whereby you might achieve that public non-domination for people to parallel with the private non-domination they will achieve under good laws and norms? And the answer, of course, in the tradition is that there are many different channels whereby people can achieve this, and they're all channels whereby they can discipline what government does. And ultimately, they can actually be in control. They can control what government does. Now, the constraints whereby they impose these on government and thereby control what government does, they can be various. They range from electoral constraints, of course, that there has to be a system of election to which everyone has access, that is open, competitive, and fair, and periodic, of course, unrigged in favor of any one side. That's one element in having control equally shared among the people over the government that lays down the law that enables them to enjoy social justice. But of course, elections alone won't give you political justice, because even under the great system of elections, you'd be leaving the people in power, the people elected to office, you'd be giving them carte blanche to act as they wish. If they had carte blanche, then we'd be subject to their will, wouldn't we? We'd be dominated, we'd be ultimately controlled to the extent they had that arbitrary or uncontrolled or unlimited discretion over us. And so we impose other constraints too. I think of them as operational constraints as well as electoral constraints. First of all, we have a constitution which we, the people, ideally can change by referendum, citizen-initiated referendum, I would say. And under that constitution, that framework of rules, we individually are given a lot of powers over government to complement the electoral power we have over government. First of all, we're given indirect power insofar as there are people appointed to office who can actually check what government is doing, where they're appointed on our terms, that is to say, under rules that we support in a transparent way, and where we can challenge them if they're not actually appointed properly. And these appointed officers, like the judiciary, independent of those we elect, can keep tabs on those we elect, can monitor and keep them honest, as we say. Hopefully, I'm talking about an ideal, but not a utopian ideal, I hope. But equally, we have those who establish the electoral districts and the electoral rules to determine that they're actually administered fairly. And we've equally got those who supply us with statistics, like a Bureau of Statistics, so that it's not in the gift of those we elect to tell us how they're doing. No, we've got these independent authorities appointed on our terms to keep a check on those we elect. So that's another way, apart from electoral constraints, that we control how government is behaving. But we also control them by imposing limitations on how they can act under the rules, the Constitution, the framework that we ultimately impose on them. So, for example, we impose a division of power so that there are different bodies that have to agree if they're going to impose a law on us. Ideally, bodies representing different aspects of our interests. Or there is a rule of law that we insist that they should follow in how they make their laws and impose them. Or there are constraints like certain basic rights or immunities that we give to individuals, say in the practice of freedom of religion, that we say to government, you can't impose in that respect on people. These are all ways of hemming in government, constraining them. Finally, apart from electoral constraints and those sorts of checking constraints internal to government. There's of course the constraint that under our constitution we allow different groups to form, like NGOs, and to keep an eye on different aspects of how the government is doing, and to raise the red flag, blow the whistle if government is not performing, say, as it promised, or not performing up to par, fairly according to received criteria, and they contest what government does. They can contest government in the courts, or in the media, or in the streets, at the limit. But that's another way in which we, the people, allowing different groups among us to exercise that contestation, we can be sure that government is hemmed in, and government is forced, restricted to acting on our terms. And that's the element of political justice in the neo-republican sort of picture. So I hope the overall picture is clear. Guiding idea, freedom is non-interference, and freedom is non-domination, or non-control, absence of control, and that drives the social justice policy of enabling people to enjoy enough security, as it were, horizontally in relation to one another, that they can pass the eyeball test. And secondly, it requires in political justice that while the government necessarily constrains everyone, it will constrain them only on terms that represent a system of control to which people have equal access. Now, the eyeball test is a nice test of whether you enjoy social justice. What would be a test of whether you enjoy political justice? Well, here I have a little test. It's maybe not quite as natural as the test for social justice, but I think it makes a lot of sense. If you really lived in a society where you felt that what government did was controlled in a way that respected everyone as equals, treated everybody as an equal, so you all had a fair share of this system of control, that government is going to pass laws, is going to develop policies, is going to take initiatives that will always displease some people in the society. There are always, for each one of us, there are some laws, initiatives, whatever, that we're going to be unhappy with. But now suppose we really believe that the decisions are made in a way that is treating us all as equals. Well, in that case, I think, here's a little test. If we really believe that, if it really were true, if we reasonably believe that, then we wouldn't feel resentment at the government. You feel resentment when another will, is taken against you. We might feel disappointment. We might feel disappointment, like we're disappointed that the weather spoils your picnic, Something happened, it didn't suit you. The cookie crumbled, but not in your favor. So you're very disappointed, but you don't feel resentment. What you feel is that the laws that were not welcome to you were actually just, it was tough luck that they were unwelcome. So my test here of political justice is the tough luck test. That's a good test intuitively as to whether or not we have enough control over enough discipline that we can impose on government so that we don't think of its interference, its constraint in our lives as controlling or dominating. We feel we're in the position of a Ulysses rather than someone who's actually controlled by those constraining. Now that's the neo-republican image of domestic justice, and I'm just going to very briefly, oh my goodness, I've been speaking for 50 minutes. Give me 5 minutes more, just to give air, if not oxygen, to the opposition. So, the interesting thing about the two alternatives, say, taking neoliberalism first, is that neoliberalism offers an alternative theory of social justice, and it says almost nothing about political justice. Neoliberalism is built around the idea that all freedom means is the absence of constraint, and control doesn't matter. It's constraint that matters, it's interference that matters. Now they're going to have, I quoted you the Nora lesson and the Ulysses lesson, it's really the anti-lesson. So the anti-lesson they will take from Nora is perfectly free. she's unconstrained, which means, of course, in your theory of social justice, it really doesn't matter, you know, that people control other people, employers, their workers, husbands, their wives, you know, the majority members, an ethnic minority. None of that matters, really, so long as there's no actual constraint. And if people are nice, well, that's fine, you know, they won't be constraining one another, and so there'll be perfect freedom. But of course, that is a recipe for having very few laws. You know, you needn't have that many laws now, because you don't need to guard against control. You only need to guard against absolute constraint. But there's another lesson, which is the anti-Ulysses lesson, or the Ulysses anti-lesson, so to speak, which is that, well, the state always constrains you. We agreed on that. Well, if constraint is bad, that means all law, to that extent, is bad too. So for two reasons, you're going to push towards a night watchman state. You know, a state, because first of all, given that the state always constrains you, it doesn't really matter whether it's democratic or non-democratic. It's still constraining you. The important thing is that it should constrain you as little as possible. Constrain you only to the minimum required to avoid civil war. And that again is a support of the night watchman state. So on both counts, neoliberalism suggests, forget about the state, political justice doesn't really matter. And notice people who are neoliberals, they sometimes do have an independent reason for wanting democracy, but it is independent of neoliberalism. I would say that China, she has probably changed it, but at one stage it looked like China was the perfect neoliberal heaven. Because even though it wasn't democratic, it was allowing all of these, it was not very constraining. Of course, the neoliberal approach also says markets are wonderful by contrast. You know? Now that's a whole other story, and I don't want to get into it, but you could see, my picture is that you get from neoliberalism an incredibly weak theory of social justice, and almost no story about political justice. So it really does not compare well, in my view, with neo-republicanism. Now finally, let's look very briefly at neo-populism. Well, neo-populism really says very little about social justice, other than that government should keep people happy, you know, or some vague thing like that. It really doesn't have any theory about how people as individuals should stand in relation to one another. What it says is a theory of political justice, a theory of how the government ought to relate to us. And what it says is, elections are the be-all and the end-all. You elect the leader, leaders, they represent the people, and they're the only ones who really have authority. These independent authorities, like the judges, who elected them? You know, as we've all heard that refrain, are the, you know, or the electoral commissioners, for that matter, or any independent authorities, the Bureau of Statistics, the source of economic data. No, we're the only people that they have authority, the only officials who have authority from the people. So push them away. But equally, there are all these NGOs out in the society challenging us. Who elected them? You know, again, the thought is that they're usurping the power of the people. We, the elected government, are the only, so to speak, this is neo-populism, I think, the only rightful authority in the state. Of course, neo-populists often go further and they say, and look, oh, those people didn't support us. Well, the familiar tactic is, they're not the real people. You know, they're low-ends, they're an elite, you know, not the people. So you get this idea of the real people for whom I speak. Of course, it really doesn't. You don't have to look very deep to see that sort of neo-populism. It's really fascism with a democratic face. A face that I fear may prove not to be all that resilient, so to speak, under pressures. And I can only hope that, you know, the sort of regime represented by Duterte in the Philippines, by Bolsonaro in Brazil, by the Turkish government of Erdogan, you know, by Orban in Hungary, by Putin in Russia. These are all leaders, perhaps, dare I say, at least in his aspiration or in his dreams, by Trump in the United States of America. It's a horrible vision of political justice, much weaker than what I was talking about. And it's got no theory of social justice, just a theory of political justice. It too is a very weak competitor with the neo-republican vision. By the way, the neo-republican vision, it seems to me, has been written into the DNA of lots of our institutions. This is not a foreign exotic doctrine I'm telling you about, you know, that you read in the history books. This is something that's been written into the long tradition of Republican constitutionalism. It's essentially a constitutionalist picture of both democracy. Of course, it allows lots of participation, but it's not populist theory of democracy and political justice. And of course, it's a theory that's improved as it's developed, I hope, at least an aspiration of what ideally social justice should look like. So I hope I'm sort of bringing a lesson, those of us in the neo-republican tradition, I'm bringing a lesson trying to reawaken people to an awareness of actually what our grand heritage is. You know, it's a Western heritage, but as I argue in other contexts, it's a heritage that responds to needs that are felt across, I think, all of humanity. It's not a particularly ethnocentric idea. Let me finish finally about why all this neo stuff, neo-republicanism, neo-populism, neo-liberalism. Well, neo-republicanism, because I certainly want to distinguish this republicanism from the GOP, the grand old party in the United States, for example. There are also other forms of republicanism I want to distinguish it from, but let me rest with that. Neoliberalism, because of course it's a very different liberalism from the liberalism of, say, Noam Chomsky, or the liberalism of, you know, left liberals in the United States, of John Rawls. That's a totally different, I think of that sort of liberalism as often converging in policy proposals, where the Republican tradition also converges, but having to do so by having a number of values weighting them like Rawls' two principles. And if they only went back to the sources, all you need is one core ideal of freedom, and then understand it as freedom as non-domination. Why neo-populism? Well, because it was a populism, at least, say, for example, in California in the 1920s, and I think the Five-Star Movement, I'm open to correction here in Italy, maybe populist in that sense too, of just wanting more opening for ordinary people into the workings of politics. And I'm all for that. It's a constitutional populism. It accepts checks and balances, independent authorities. It accepts NGOs. It just wants to open up more avenues of influence. Populism in that sense is absolutely fine. I want to distinguish populism. I'm talking about that constitutional populism. I want to present as neo-populism, but I think it was essentially an anti-constitutional populism, a populism that wants to get rid of the checks and balances and of the NGOs, you know, the contestation in favor of really an investment of authority in a single party that claims unique authority in the country. So that's about it. Thank you very much.